Hello, I'm Joseph Wirtz. I'm doing the assignment on the UN SMR. I'm a lot more eloquent in text than I am in person, so if I have any grammatical errors or anything like that, I'm going to have to ask to see if you can excuse me on any of those. But let's get started. So, the UN SMR prioritizes 9 different things. There's prisoners' inherent dignity, and let's start with that. So, number one is the prisoner's inherent dignity and value as a human being. Even though they're a criminal, they're still a person. You need to treat all criminals with respect due to their inherent dignity and value as people. You need to protect prisoners from tortures and other forms of ill treatment like abuse, and ensure the safety and security of all prisoners, staff, and service providers at all times. And number two is vulnerable groups of prisoners. This is for disabled or mentally ill prisoners, people that are more vulnerable than your standard normal prisoner, what have you. You need to take account of the needs of prisoners, in particular in the most vulnerable categories. Protect and promote the rights of prisoners with special needs, as well as ensure prisoners excuse me, with physical, mental, and or other disabilities have full effective access to prison life and are treated for their health conditions. Number three is medical and health services, just kind of how medicine in prison should be taken. You need to ensure that the same standards of healthcare that are available to the wider community are, in fact, available to prisons. You need to evaluate, promote, and protect the physical and mental health of prisoners, including prisoners with special healthcare needs, like discussed before. You need to adhere to the principles of clinical independence, medical confidentiality, informed consent, and the doctor-patient relationship, and continuity of treatment or care, including for stuff like tuberculosis, HIV, and other infectious diseases and drug dependence, or drug dependence rather. You need to have an absolute prohibition of healthcare professionals to engage in torture or other forms of ill treatment like abuse and um, I'm sorry, and experimentation, things like that. Number four, you need restrictions, discipline, and sanctions. You need to define prolonged solitary confinement as the confinement of a prisoner for 22 hours or more a day without meaningful human contact for more than 15 consecutive days, and restrict the use of solitary confinement as a measure that's like a last resort and only used in very exceptional circumstances. You need to prohibit indefinite or prolonged solitary confinement or the placement of a prisoner in a dark or constantly lit cell. You need to provide detailed guidance on searches of prisoners and cells, as well as on legitimate use of instruments of restraint in line with the need to ensure security and safety as prisons, as well as the respect to inherent human dignity as prisoners. Confirm that healthcare professionals should pay particular attention to involuntarily separated prisoners, and encourage prison administrators to use conflict prevention, mediation, or other alternative dispute resolutions to prevent or resolve conflicts. Number five is the investigation of deaths and torture in custody. Specify information to be entered into the file management system upon admission of every prisoner in the course of imprisonment, and clarify that these shall be kept confidential. You need to detail the rights of prisoners or outside parties, families, designated contacts to be notified about imprisonment, transfer to another institution, serious injury, or death. Require any custodial death, disappearance, or serious injury of a prisoner be reported to a competent authority independent of the prison administration. Impartial and effective investigations into the circumstances which cause such cases, and require similar procedures as an act of torture or other ill treatment may have been committed in prison. Things like that. Number six is access to legal representation. Inform prisoners when they arrive about the authorized methods of seeking access to legal advice, including legal aid schemes, things like that. Provide adequate opportunity, time, and facilities for all prisoners to be visited and communicate with a legal advisor of their choice. Grant prisoners the right to defend themselves in person or through legal assistance when the interests of justice so require, and abstain from search and entry procedures for visitors which are degrading in any way or less protective than those outlined searches and prisoners and cells. See, complaints and inspections. Extend the right to file complaints to a prisoner's relative or other person who has knowledge of the case when the prisoner or his or her legal advisor is not able to do so. require the implementation of safeguards to ensure that the requests and complaints can be submitted in a safe and, if so requested, confidential manner. Establish a twofold system of regular inspections consisting of internal or administrative inspections conducted by the Central Prison Administration and external inspections conducted by a body independent of the Prisoner Association. Grant prison inspectors key entitlements to effectively assume their tasks, including access to prisoner records, unannounced visits at their own initiative, as well as private and fully confidential interviews with prisoners and prison staff. 8 is terminology. This is a more modern one. It's more updating health-related technology and rendering revised rules of a gender-sensitive document in case anyone's sensitive to that or may not fall into either or. And number 9 is staff training. This involves relevant national legislations, regulations, and policies, as well as international and regional instruments, which are the guide to work interactions with prisoner staff and prisoners, overall rights and duties of prison staff to exercise their functions, including everything stated above, security and safety, including dynamic security, as well as use of force and instruments of restraint, with due consideration of preventative and diffusion techniques, first aid, the psychological needs of prisoners, as well as social care and assistance. So, let's run through this with the model nations. The first model nation is England, and England has a pretty good prison system in my opinion. It's efficient, it's gets the job done. It's not like overly heavy like many other prison systems, and it's not like too full like the American one. It's just kind of an efficient way to do things. I feel like the hardest thing for them to implement, and the hardest thing for, frankly, most, if not all model countries, is protection for vulnerable groups of prisoners. Because prisons can kind of be made on the cheap because they're institutions that house criminals, and a lot of people will get, particularly in countries like America, will get very iffy if you spend too much money on them, wasting taxpayer dollars and all that. So, making sure that a prison is safe and effective for all sort of conditions, like being in a wheelchair or having crutches or what have you, can be very difficult, especially also because many prisons are very old and are just implemented stairs and whatnot. Next, we have France. France, Germany, and Japan all kind of fall into the same category as England. They're all efficient, relatively humane in comparison to other prison systems throughout the world that you may want to see. Japan, however, does have a bit of an issue. Japan has a pretty totalitarian, as they put it, prison system, and this can be difficult with gangs. Like 25% of Japanese prisoners, I believe, are involved in a gang or organized crime, and particularly prisoners like the prisoners who may have like a drug dependency or a mental um, insufficiency and things like that. These prisoners are not adequately taken care of in a Japanese system because of just how strict it is. The Japanese have a very high emphasis on being normal and being able-bodied and what have you, so they don't really have that sort of thing. France and Germany are very similar to England's system, in my opinion, and they work well. Like just like I said, vulnerable groups of prisoners may have trouble because a lot of prisons are underfunded, or just old and don't have the adequate things, elevators, ramps, etc., etc. So these other systems, while good, are not really up to code per se with this particular document and that the UN made. And then there's the cases of China and Saudi Arabia. Now, China and Saudi Arabia are difficult because we have a lot less to go on with those countries because they're less friendly. I don't want to say friendly. They're less open to investigations on their sort of territory. But Saudi Arabia is very known for its um, corporal punishment. Corporal punishment is a big part of sacred law, in particular any like crimes against God. Corporal punishments are normally employed and that sort of thing, and that really is in conflict with prisoners' inherent dignity and value as human beings, because you need to ensure the safety, security in all prisoners and prevent them from ill treatment. But in Saudi Arabia, a lot of prisoners are mistreated because of certain things, like if they stole something, if they, uh, what have you. They are corporal punishment is a big implement in Saudi Arabia. So it's been a big implement in Saudi Arabia since not religious, since sacred law really came about. China is in a similar way with their thought reform and what have you. They don't really treat prisoners as humane as we should expect them to. They treat prisoners as subhuman. That's what they see them as. Is just something, I don't want to say in the way per se, but just something that's there pervasively, not really a collection of human beings. They just kind of see them as just things that are there, and that's a big problem in China because China has the second highest prison population under the U.S. So I believe those. So I'm essentially what standards I believe are the most difficult to achieve and why for Japan, England, Germany, and France. I believe that vulnerable groups of prisoners are the hardest standards to achieve. As stated before, old prisons, a lack of funding, or in Japan's case, sort of a totalitarian view of prisons and prisoners. And for Saudi Arabia and China, it's the prisoners' inherent dignity and value because they don't really treat prisoners as well as they should or as well as other respected members of their community, things like that. So I think that's all I've got. I hope this isn't too long. I apologize if it is. Have a good day.